and McCann.
Greetings. Welcome to Wake the Dead. Today we are very delighted to continue our conversation with Jon Uhler L.P.C. Greetings, Jon. Welcome.
John, good to be back with you. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, you're very welcome to be here. We've learned so much from our previous conversations, and we get so deep into it, and then all of a sudden the time runs out, and here we are for another one. And I'm delighted that you have decided to share more of your time with us and my listeners, and we thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
So today, I guess I wanted to start with where we ended off on the last one. With the last episode, we were talking about pornography, the deviant sexual psychopaths, and how pornography is fuel on the fire for creating a psychopath. And everybody should go back and listen to that. My recording audio was of lower quality, and I apologize for that. But all the words were, your words were clear and wonderful. We could hear them very well. So I apologize to the listeners for my technical malfunction. But today we are recording loud and clear, and we're going to start off where we left off. Right at the end of the last conversation, you were describing what is the sophisticated psychopath. I guess I'll put it in your hands. What is the sophisticated psychopath?
And again, if you're like me, if you're halfway average person, when you first hear the term psychopath, we think of the Freddy Krueger, we think of the horror movie kind of person. That's what comes to mind. But the reality is there are two categories. This is based upon Robert Hare himself, who designed the PCL-R, the Hare Psychopathy Checklist. That's the gold standard in forensic professional assessments that are given to courts for their decision as far as someone able to stand trial, as it were. Now, what's ironic when we're talking about the sophisticated psychopath, Robert Hare called them the white-collar psychopath. So when you think of psychopathy, I'll give somebody the working definition of it. So it's a little bit easier then to understand the difference between, or differentiate between, the bloody psychopath and the white-collar psychopath. So psychopathy is best understood, in my estimation, not as it relates to, or its origin is found in genetics or nurture, nature. Now, do those play a part? Play a part with all sorts of things, but you would have then every identical twins. If one of them was a psychopath, you'd have every one of them being psychopaths. That's not the case. Okay, so psychopathy, by definition, you only have to focus on three things to understand it. And then the question is, how is that going to play out? And then personality. Okay. The best way to understand it is it always comes down to conscience. And that's something that all of us have control over, right? We decide to what extent we're going to have a conscience. You're not born without a conscience. It doesn't work that way. The word conscience means with knowledge, so with science, so with knowledge. You end up not having a conscience if you override it. You override your conscience long enough, you create a callus on your heart, you become indifferent. If you work at decreasing the effectiveness, your guilt will go down, and you can reach a point where you feel no guilt, no shame any longer. And that means you are a psychopath. So the best way to understand it, so we're going to really demystify that cool sounding term. Psychology justifies its existence a lot of times just by coming up with new terms. But there's nothing new under the sun. I'm going to go back to ancient biblical books of wisdom, where it will reference the fool. It's my contention that the old-fashioned term fool, not how it's referenced in this day and age, but the old-fashioned term fool can now be interchanged with the term psychopath. Go and read the book of Proverbs. You'll see it has a lot to do with the fool. It will speak about that category. These are categories. And it will tell you not to be around them, not to engage with them, not to live with them, not to give honor to one. It doesn't say don't give honor to a fool unless they're your parent, then, or your child. Well, then give honor to them. It doesn't say that. So it's equal opportunity. And it will always equate, and this is in the Hebrew, the Old Testament is written in Hebrew primarily. It will always equate fool with something that has taken place viscerally within the person in terms of their appetites, their perspective, their attitudes, but what drives them. And a fool has harmonized with evil. And therefore, everything about a fool will be polar opposite of God in what interests them and what drives them, what motivates them, what entertains them. So where God designed our mind to be able to, as it were, think his thoughts. Now, I'm not getting into too weird of stuff. We are not God, but he made us in his image so that we can have a sense of, we intuitively have a sense. The closer someone gets to God, you will think his thoughts, not because, this is my own perspective, and from an Old Testament Jewish perspective, not because we become God, but because we start to change and we grow in terms of his value system, in terms of his character qualities. If somebody's familiar with the New Testament, there's a phrase that says, let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus. And it'll talk about taking on the role of a servant leadership. That runs counter to the world, by the way. The world operates under the realm of fools or psychopaths.
Right.
The golden rule. So the golden rule for someone that's godly or on the path is love others, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you're at the opposite end of the continuum, the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules.
Right.
So it's pragmatism.
That's the essence of a fool, is
there you go.
The lack of morality, right?
It's pure pragmatism. Right. And so if I become a pure pragmatist, I objectify people. People are no longer people. People are a means to an end. And so someone who has God's mind will be able to intuitively sense what is right, wrong, good, bad, and they will automatically place as their highest value the proper treatment of people, treating someone in a right, just, and fair fashion. That comes out of Proverbs chapter 1 and 2. If we pray for wisdom, the only time you need to pray for wisdom is if you have people in your life. Right? If you crash land on a tropical island, you can either pray to be rescued or not to be rescued, but you don't need the book of Proverbs. The only time we need the book of Proverbs is when we have, in one way or another, when we're having to interact with somebody. Now you're dealing with boundaries.
Right.
And so it's all about making wise decisions with respect to other people, both us, how we're going to treat them, and how we're going to allow them to treat us. And the two internal mechanisms that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. The two mechanisms that God has given us internally to keep boundaries where they should be. That's another way of saying to keep relationships healthy, which is based upon respect, value, and esteem. Well, value in what way? I'm valuing someone else as God values them. So I have God's values toward other people. Therefore, the closer I get to God, I will have a value system that runs counter to the world. The world says on Black Friday, you line up at Walmart, and when the doors open, you crush anybody in your way to get a TV you don't need to watch. So forget women and children going down. Men go down with the ship first, women and children in the lifeboats. Well, you watch Black Friday, people are getting trampled to death over materialistic goods that they don't need.
Right.
That's
look at Gaza, and they're bombing women and children first, right? That's So
So
anyway,
whenever you see someone get further away from God's value system, then the value of people decreases, and selfishness, ego increases. So it's all about self. So the two mechanisms that are always in play, designed and intended to maintain boundaries, which has to do with maintaining respect one for another, are two things: conscience and intuition. My conscience is designed to keep me on my side of your property line, Sean. Let's say let's say it's trash night and I got to take out the trash. But let's say the shortest distance between 2 points is your yard, and we don't have a fence. But you're going to find out how much I value you by me staying on my property line rather than possibly littering your line. Maybe I'm tossing my garbage onto your yard, right? Why? Well, Sean doesn't mind. So now I'm presuming, okay? So I'll only do that to the extent that I care more about me and value me than you. So as my estimation, think about the scales of justice, that kind of scales. As my estimation of me goes up in terms of my ego, so I go from a healthy to a super healthy,
right.
ego-driven, right? By virtue of that, as my ego increases, what happens to your value in my mind? You decrease. So now
Exactly.
I can justify and rationalize treating you in any way. Now I'm beginning to objectify you.
Right.
Okay, so conscience will prevent that. Intuition prevents that, where I feel less than. So conscience and intuition, two sides of the same coin, designed to make sure that boundaries are maintained. It's another way of saying that we're not taking our stuff and putting it on somebody else. We're not taking our knapsacks. That is our responsibility to do what is right, just, and fair. Our emotional responsibility. It's not enough just to pay the bills. Okay? It's more than that as far as being a responsible human being. Because I can pay the bills yet walk by somebody in need. That's the world. Have I become cold, callous, and indifferent with respect to the pain and suffering of others? Okay, so we're talking emotional responsibility. We are our brother's keeper. So that is a value system. The further you get away from God's value system, then all that gets inverted. Why? Because ego increases, and thus there's a natural devaluing of other people. If you allow that process to take place, and Sean, can we share the screen? Or if not, I think I put you in that position before, maybe.
It's easier if I share from my end, and you can walk me through.
Or if we've shown you, or I'll send you the copy of the slippery slope. Have I shown you that one? The color.
Is it on the SurvivorSupport.net?
And I'll send it to you. It is not. It is not. So what I'll do is I will send it to you. But the best way to view this is picture a slippery slope. So we're at the top, and we're going to call that normal. We're going to call that a fully working, functional conscience.
Right.
To the extent, and we'll picture a path. So we're on the top of a ridge line with a path. So as long as we stay on the path, a lot of us have been to national parks. It says stay on the path.
Right.
So it's both probably a principle and it's a request. So we're not trampling plants down and littering, and that's why they have trash cans along the way. Okay, so we're being mindful of other people coming behind us. To the extent that I'm not going to listen to authority, we could say that those signs would be equivalent of an informed conscience. Do not litter. Stay on the path. To the extent that I listen to that information that has been inputted and now I've internalized it, nobody's going to have to put signs up. But to the extent that I have dumbed my conscience down, now we need signs. And then we need, please don't litter. Then we get into fine print. So think about contract law. It used to be that a man's word was his bond and we would do a handshake. That's a society that has a high value of other people, and we will govern ourselves to the extent that we objectify others. Now, we ourselves are the arbiter of what is good, bad, right, and wrong. We're going to justify and rationalize. And therefore, I'll have 50 shades of gray and lots of fine print in my contracts. I have escape clauses. And so you can see the health of a society based upon the amount of contract attorneys.
Yeah.
Why do you hire a contract attorney? Because it's like chess. We're playing these mental games. If you've ever seen the fine print of anything, they come at the same thing, 87 different angles. Why? Because a profound white-collar psychopath is always trying to find a loophole. So you got to hem them in. Right? So our society now is filled with white-collar psychopaths who are creating contracts with one another intended to break the contract. And look at how people are entering into marriage. And now young people say, why am I even going to get married? I've seen how that works. But marriage is simply what? Two imperfect people in an impossible situation. And if you think you have enough patience on your own to make that relationship go the distance, you're either a better person than I am or you're deluded. You actually need God's help. And so for a marriage to be what it needs to be, we have to make sure there's no escape clause. The opposite of escape clause is friends with benefits.
Right.
Right? Love you and leave
And
you.
that's what's become we see that kind of idea, like you're saying, with all the divorce lawyers, and also all the pornography in the kids' hands. And like, this is their from our last show, that this adds into it. The friends with benefits is like entrained into them, and they're thought that women are supposed to be submissive and I'm supposed to dominate them, and like all these other ideas get like
Right.
put in. So therefore you need the escape clause, because this is how I really feel inside now, because I've been turned into a sexual deviant via the pornography. Like, they all add to each other and complement.
There you go. There you go. And that's why really the best way to understand it is to understand, aside from the wow factor of the label psychopath, what are we talking about? Because really the word comes from a Greek word meaning pathological soul. Psyche comes from the Greek word psyche, which means soul or spirit. So if you have a psychopath, you have a pathological soul.
Right.
And how do you get to that point? Well, allow ego to grow and you'll be pathological, but you'll be the only one that doesn't believe you're pathological. Right? You'll say, well,
Right.
I'll get everybody, we'd all get along if everybody just do what I say. Right? We don't
Hence
say,
the
oh, that's
monarchy, and
right?
we
just say, well, that's somebody with a good self-esteem. That's a selfish person. That's really all this is.
Yeah, they're just doing them. Just do you.
Doing me, right?
Right.
So what's a psychopath say? That's it. I'm going to do me. Oh, there's a shock.
Right.
That's what the world does. That's what we feed kids, so to speak, right? You're the most important person in the world, and you don't have to play by the rules. And meaning you spoil a child, and you're going to create the very real potential of a psychopath. Why? Because now he believes the world revolves around him, and when he doesn't like it, he'll march through Portland or Seattle and he'll burn the place down to the ground. Why? Because he's upset. And he'll make 4 generations later, he'll say, you owe to his current generation, you owe me. You need to pay me reparations. Even though he's never worked a day in his life, he wants you, who's been ripped off by tax assembly, to pay him a bunch of money. Why? Because he's going to rationalize and justify theft.
Exactly. So the tax law, look at how much confusing tax law, like, whoa, all the lawyers focusing on that, stealing of our productivity. So these sophisticated psychopaths have created a society where they can do what they're going to do. They've engineered it so that it's all possible. I wanted to real quick, our society used to be based on the Bible, and that's how
Christian ethic. That's right. That's
like
right.
That's the Magna Carta, and the idea of like do no harm, these, morality,
Right.
basically. And now it's like the fool, someone who is illiterate of morality, I guess, we used to have a term for that too. It's called moron. And in psychology, a moron is someone who does not understand morality, someone who is devoid of the moral ability in your
In
mind.
fact, that comes right out of the book of Romans. Thinking themselves wise, they became fools. So instead of translating it more, the Greek word literally in that verse is morone.
Wow.
We get the word moron. So thinking
just like the Moroni of
right?
Mormons.
Okay, we won't go there.
Yeah.
Exactly right. It
Right.
says that thinking that they're becoming increasingly wise, they're becoming morons.
Yes.
We're not calling them names. That's important to understand. What is that? It's devoid of any morals.
Exactly. Right.
And so now we've just described, quite frankly, Nazi doctors.
Yeah.
Right. That I can experiment on people and not worry about it. Why? I'm not constrained by morals. We have no Hippocratic oath. Animals do not take a Hippocratic oath. It's very unique to us as people. Right. So I'm not saying that only the Judeo-Christian value system has within it a high value of people, but all things being equal, as far as enduring, the founding fathers were governed by a worldview that was steeped in a theological premise that, number one, there is a God and we're not him. There is a God and we're accountable to him. And there is a God who cares about how we treat other people and is involved in the affairs of men. They called it providence.
Right.
And so God's movement through human history, the providential overseeing or oversight or superintending of God's nature, would be able to protect and guide his people, and thus a city set on a hill. We are a light for other people, and so we then also have a sense of destiny. That's not a myopic sense of destiny. Hopefully we all have that. If you're a parent, if you don't instill a sense of destiny within your child, now that doesn't mean we're fanning into flames narcissism. We just call it this. How about a purpose-driven life? Were you born for a purpose? That means there's a destiny for you. That'll help a child when the going gets tough and he was walking through the valley of the shadow of death. He better risk believing that he was born for a purpose.
Right.
Or you're going to have a very difficult time countering the narrative in this day and age that says, you know what, we're just a cosmic accident and it doesn't really matter whether we live or die. So hopefully we've taken a page out of existential therapy. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Existential therapy is based upon his work. It says this, that we will be unsettled and we will have a very difficult time going through difficult things and coming out better rather than bitter unless we can answer these three key questions, by the way, which is, where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? So origins and purpose and destiny. Somebody who lacks that will lack resilience, by the way. But if you also teach someone that this is all there is, then you know what? Eat, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow you die. Now you've got a very pragmatic view, and they're going to place themselves first. And now that's a great way to create little psychopaths. Let me add the other two characteristics of psychopathy. Okay, so the reason why I camped on the issue of conscience is that's the best way to understand everything we're going to talk about.
Yes.
So if you are in a position to influence others and you are someone who's reached a point where you have no conscience, you're all about always working somebody in your best interest. And the more you can get them to buy into your worldview, then the easier it is to manipulate things.
I see.
So once you get to a point where you override your conscience, and it's by degree, so it's not a black or white either or. You don't wake up one day without a conscience. It's like taking the volume down on our speaker system little by little by little. And before you know it, you're not hearing anything anymore. So you violate conscience, you resist conscience long enough, it'll be effective. You create a callus, as it were. And as goes conscience, so goes my heart, so to speak. So I either have a compassionate heart or a hardened heart. So how do you get to a point where you have a hardened heart? Either because you've been hurt so much, but that's really the little turtle that's getting tucked into a shell. That's a protective thing. But somebody who hasn't been hurt, who's just decided to not care enough, can get to a point where they can walk by somebody who's genuinely in need and not feel anything. And then they can even craft a theology around it, saying, well, you know what, they're probably just working out their own eternal struggle. We won't say it's karmic struggles. And if I intervene in that, then I'm actually going to hurt them in the long run. So I'm not going to alleviate their suffering in this life. So now I've justified it eternally.
Right.
And now I'll call it a caste system. Did I go there? Yeah, I went there. So, okay.
No,
so
it's true.
So it's the issue of conscience. It always comes down to conscience. The more you override conscience, the more you will. The less conscience you have, two things are going to be very natural, or will be the natural byproduct of a conscience that is becoming silenced. You will not care about the impact you're going to have on somebody else because you're overriding boundaries. And the question is, what happens when you cross somebody's boundaries, when you devalue them, disrespect them? Conscience will make you feel badly, even before or whether the person has even noticed you did that. So that's somebody with a high conscience, right? How about it's moral and character development? It's all one and the same. Okay, if my conscience is effective, long before you notice, I will have actually governed myself. And then if I have a really sensitive conscience, I'm actually going to tell you and apologize for something you don't even know what I'm apologizing about. And then you'll typically say, well, John, don't worry about it. Well, I feel badly because I actually thought about my thinking that was, it's like,
right.
John, you're really worked up over this. Okay. So, but it'll never manifest itself physically. It's actually, I'll stop myself at even the attitude level, the thought, attitude, even before it comes out of my mouth in terms of word or deed. Okay, so somebody with a high character has a very sensitive conscience. As things go downhill by choice, so once I get off the path, I only get off the path because ego now has drawn me off the path. My ego is starting to grow like a snowball. As ego grows, my conscience is being overridden. Conscience is the brakes on ego. So as I let go of the brakes, ego grows. Two things happen. My value, because my value of other people is going down, as my value of me is going up. By virtue of that, I will negatively impact you on an increasing basis and be ever less concerned. So my empathy is decreasing. Okay, so as goes conscience, so goes empathy and remorse. So I won't care about the fact that I've impacted you, and I won't be sorry in my heart of hearts.
Right.
Okay, that's how you understand everything we're going to talk about.
Yeah, you perfectly described Satanism. Like I studied Satanism from ex-Satanists, and they described how it starts with ego, and then goes to moral relativism, and then to from that to social Darwinism, where like they put themselves over others, and then eventually eugenics, where they are allowed to kill the others that are less than. That's, you know, the encapsulation of the real tenets of Satanism. Nicholas Schreck, he's a former Satanist now. I think he's a transcendental meditating Buddhist. But now, in the days when he was a Satanist in the 90s, I saw a recording of him speaking with a Christian guy making a program, and he's interviewing this Nicholas Schreck, who was a member of the Church of Satan, and he was describing, I remember specifically, about how Nicholas Schreck said that it is weak and wrong to give charity to the people on the side of the road.
Well, it's almost Ayn Rand in extreme.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, if you look at
The
Ayn
virtue
Rand,
of selfishness.
yes,
right? That I can justify and rationalize anything. So under the guise of libertarianism, and I'm personally very conservative,
mm-hmm.
but when you see how far somebody can take this, so the idea of capitalism being evil, capitalism is not, what is capitalism? It's what I do with my own private property. That's all.
Right.
Godless capitalism. So the question is, to what extent am I governed by God's value system? Give me somebody who has God's heart and give them $1 million, and guess what they're going to do with $1 million?
Give it
Versus
away.
you take someone that's 100% selfish and all about them, give them $1 million, guess what they're going to do with it?
Right.
So give me somebody that has God's heart. That's the kind of person I want to entrust with power, with money, with sex, with anybody, because they are most known by self-control. Why? Because they have a high conscience. Why? Because they have a high value of people. Why? Because they know they're going to give an account to God. Why? Because they believe God exists and they're not God. So they are a steward then of everything that God has given to them, because they know they're going to stand before the God of the universe and give an account of every jot and tittle, every thought, every word, every deed, and they're never going to cut themselves any slack because God won't. That's the kind of neighbor you want. That's the kind of business partner you want. That's the kind of spouse you want. That's the kind of us we want, where we then are self-governing because we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created. That's a theological statement.
Yes.
All men are created equal in God's eyes. That's different than how they choose to use their talents and abilities. That's different than, some have greater IQ points or not, but we should then give people the freedom to maximize their talents and abilities and then enjoy the fruits of their labor. And you are not justified by using the power of the sword of government to extract the positive benefits, the fruits of somebody's labor, because that's simply organized theft.
Right. Taxation is theft. Right?
And then you're shifting the culture of government from a high value of people to a low value of people. And that's where the Satanists have described simply the world system, which is, as ego grows, the value of everybody else diminishes, and therefore those that are in charge are governed by themselves. We simply call that pragmatism. If that's the case, then as I interact either on an individual basis or on a collective basis, if I'm on top, then I'm seeing life through the grid of me and how it benefits me, not you. And therefore, it's going to be, what have you done for me lately? Okay, yeah. We're talking business now. Okay, so that if now I'm using government to leverage and to place myself and my interests first, then how I'm going to distribute money and what laws I'm going to create all depend upon my value system. So ultimately then, the care of people or social welfare, or how about healthcare, will be based upon who can benefit me the most. So now what are we talking about? We're talking about the quote unquote producers. Okay, so they're the ones that will be of value. But prior to being a maximum producer, or once you've outlived your usefulness, you're expendable. Now I've just crafted for you socialized medicine, cradle to the grave. All we do is this: in order to save money, eventually you're going to have to, because you're going to have an increase in graying the population. Why? Because now sex and sexuality is not other oriented. It's not an act of two becoming one. It's not out of a high value of people. It's a value of self, my body, my choice, and therefore eventually you're going to not produce kids because kids require selflessness on the part of parents. So now sex becomes self-fulfillment, and therefore the amount of babies that are going to be born decreases. And now you have fewer workers in the working years taking care of the older folks from that old generation where that crazy little concept of marriage is a social contract that places a high value of people. So now fewer workers are having to support more, and we don't have value of human life. Now it's a utilitarian perspective. The usefulness, sports utility vehicle. So now I will look at those that are starting to be a drain on the limited resources. And what we're going to do is justify and rationalize the expenditures based upon utilization review boards, death panels.
Death panels, right. Well, you can't talk about that, as Bill Gates says.
Okay, right. But okay, we won't call them death panels. It's just utilization review boards. So that if you have cancer, and this is where Ayn Rand did nail it. So, right, it's the producers versus those that have needs. Well, by whose standards? So those that in a selfish society, the needs are always going to outweigh the needs of the many are going to outweigh the needs of the producers. So we're going to bleed them dry until they either give up or are non-productive or walk away. And who is John Galt?
Right.
And so they're just going to give up in society. And then everything gets dumbed down to the lowest level. And that's where you have an increasing disparity between the uber rich and the poor. There's no middle class then. Why? We bled that. Middle class was just people that were starting to accumulate wealth. So we've stolen that, we've disseminated it, and now we've pitted people against one another. Now we have class envy and class warfare. It comes right out of the mind of Satan. So that's why he loves us. It's a beautiful thing to him. So the only way to understand all this is selfishness, quite frankly.
Exactly.
So once somebody understands that,
morality
too, labels of psychopathy, but we'll still now talk about, okay, how do you understand psychopathy? And now, how does it play out in terms of our interaction with other people, but especially in terms of sex and sexuality? But the way to understand now the chart and what we're going to talk about is think in terms of somebody that has given themselves permission to be increasingly selfish. They've gone down the slippery slope. Ego's grown like a snowball. You will go through certain stages and you'll get to a point where you'll override your conscience to a point that you have no conscience. For those of us that have a conscience, that is not appealing to not have a conscience. We wouldn't like that. Well, that's because we have a conscience. But you haven't gotten to a point where you don't have a conscience. And that sounds contradictory. It's, well, I don't want to reach that. But let's pretend. Let's pretend you did. What you would actually experience is this. You would experience being less and less bothered by your conscience bothering you, and you'd get to a point where it really doesn't bother you anymore. And as a matter of fact, you'd see the benefits of not having conscience, and pretty soon it's like, you know what? I think that old hindrance of that conscience, I think it was overrated. You know what? I'm really beginning to see the benefits of, and it's this is the transition point that most people don't understand, which is when somebody's becoming a psychopath, the midway, the twisting effect, I liken it to a jet going through a cloud bank and getting inverted, doing a barrel roll. Now it's upside down. It's all foggy. They can't see what they're doing. Their instrumentation, their instrument panel is telling them they're upside down, but they don't feel it. And now the question is when they hear on the speaker system, though they can't see anything, when they hear mountain range pull up, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
If left to themselves, they're going to drive themselves even further into danger. Okay, but they're now making the rules. They don't believe there is such a thing as divine justice, as right and wrong. Now they are the arbiters of it. So it's Evictus, it's the poem. They are the captain of their ship, the masters of their fate. So they will not be held accountable. They are unbroken. Thank you very much. That's special. right? If you've ever been married to someone who is unbroken, if you have a child that is unbroken, now, that's the goal of parenting, is to break the ego, not break it, meaning bring it under control like a wild stallion without breaking the spirit. So we want to have a child whose spirit, we call that self-esteem. We want to have good self-esteem, but that they understand they're not the center of the universe.
Right.
That it's not an army of one. You know, society's in trouble when you have to market for the army, an army of one. No, there's no I in team, right? That's why team sports are important for kids, because they realize that, right? If it's all about them, yeah, coach is going to tell them, well, take a few laps, come back, and we'll talk about whether this is about you or not, whether you're expendable. We all know what happens in professional teams when a player starts to view it all about them. It disrupts the esprit de corps.
Yeah, the army is truly socialist. Like, that's a real socialist organization. And I've been through boot camp. There's boot camp through jail. It was like a jail boot camp, but it was run by the military dudes, right?
There you go. That's right.
They made it so that we had to discover that we were all together, and like, it's not a competition like in elementary school. You're trying to fight all the other kids that are your age and trying to do better, run faster, whatever. With this, they would punish us until we were all doing it the same, until everybody crossed the line at the same time. It was a psycho. I mean, they even did like where you, like a death ritual where you throw into the fire everything you care about, and like, they did a lot of psychological attacks on the inmates. But basically that well, anyway, I was just trying to further illustrate where you're going with that. But you spoke earlier, you kind of were steering it into how the whole society has been satanified by these sophisticated psychopaths, and they have inverted the worldview of everybody, so that when we all pull up, we're all going to crash and burn. Like, if we try to pull up, like, our instrumentation is upside down.
That's right. And you watch, if you raise your head and you speak out, especially about anything to do with morals and ethics, you're done. You'll be targeted. Right. If you tell someone there's right and wrong when it comes to sex and sexuality, and that there should be guardrails, such as boys or young men who've been accessing porn shouldn't go in the girls' bathroom or washroom or locker rooms. At Planet Fitness, guys should not be permitted into the women's locker area. Why? Because they're guys. So they're different by nature. We're wired differently.
Right.
All a perp needs is for someone to believe the guy's not a perp.
Right.
So all a perp needs is for you to be brain dead. All a perp needs is for you to not have your intuition.
For us to be fools and morons.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right. So our intuition is, whether you want to call it our sixth sense, it's that which gives us enough information before the facts are established or piled up in front of our face to where we have enough concrete evidence. Well, if you need enough concrete evidence before you're able to make a defensive or protective decision, kiss your wallet goodbye. The snake oil salesman's gotten out of Dodge a long time ago by the time you realize he sold you snake oil. Okay, so I had better be able to have that sense about me that it's something like, wait, there's something up with that guy. Okay, that's in the more subtle areas. But, okay, a guy's dressing in women's underwear and a female outfit, and he wants to walk in the female locker room with showers. And I'm supposed to think that's okay, because I'm not supposed to assume what I already know about any guy that would try to do that.
Right.
Because now a guy doesn't have to climb a tree and look in a second-story window. All he has to do is what? say the magic words, and he can go right into a shower area of We Spa or Planet Fitness.
Right.
Or get on a sports team. Why does any guy want to be on a women's sports team? Two things.
So that he can punch a woman in the face
Okay,
full
right.
force,
There you go.
right?
That's right. Yeah,
Get a
right.
medal for it.
Okay, so it's BDSM on track and field, number one.
Right.
And then number two, they all get to go into the women's locker room. Look at Leah Davis, or Thompson, the guy, the swimmer. Okay,
Right.
Thomas. Sorry about that. Well, surprise, surprise. What kind of stuff did they find him accessing on a separate website? Really heinous, deviant porn. It will always, always be the case. All this is the greatest joke by perverted, twisted guys on society, and they're just seeing how far they can push this whole thing. It's because for a psychopath, half the fun of it is seeing the boundaries they can push and playing good people for fools.
Right. So
all this is just entertainment while they're achieving their end goal, which is getting in there, ogling, looking at the women and filming them.
And getting access to children as well.
100%.
Right. And so the shoving it in our face, and like we're all supposed to have intuition, and they have satanified us with Kinsey and with sexology and public schooling and the trans movement, and now they have the enshrined celebration of the greatest human abilities on earth, the Olympics. They are shoving this trans stuff, this pedophilia, the ancient bacchanal and Cybele, cults where they would remove genitalia and they would spray blood on everybody. I mean, they're showing us in our face so far, and it's being accepted, and it's like it's aggrandizing their own ego. They're like, oh, look what we can do, haha, and it's more ego focused, so that goes along with the Satanism that we were talking about earlier. And it also it's like a test to see how many people in society don't have intuition anymore. How many fools, just like the other test a couple of years ago where people had to wear a piece of paper over their face,
There you go. Right.
and then you can see, oh, that person's down with the mind control. Oh, okay, we got them. So now they're displaying a man's testicles with a child in the same frame and a dude to represents Dionysus in blue, like on a plate, like a platter to be eaten. And they're mocking the Last Supper painting by Da Vinci. I mean, it's so in your face. And people like me or my friends that have been, that make these, deep, look into the occult symbolism and look into what they've been doing to society. It's like old hat to us, like, oh, again, yeah, more of that. Okay. But it really is a test of society. And the obese woman who was Jesus, she is suing people who attacked her satanic display. She's suing them in court because France has these anti-free speech laws, and they can, right? So this is what they're trying to do to our society here too in America. They're, in England, people that that share a meme or something that is anti-immigrant, all of a sudden they go to jail. Meanwhile, if they go outside, they get beaten by 20 immigrants who have 2x4s. And it's all on video. And the cops are like, it's okay with the brown people can do that. They're allowed to burn stuff and beat everybody. But you English whitey, they've totally inverted completely everything. And it's so in our face that you and me were like yelling at the top of our lungs, hello, wake up, everybody, But hopefully it's shaken some people into reality and waking up their intuition. but they've had 3 generations at least, and the television, and the cell phones, and, like, why exactly would psychopaths want to normalize the sexual deviance? You kind of got into it earlier, but this, I guess it opens the door to them being more like to be fully open with it. If they did put the P on the end of LGBTQ plus whatever, then it would be like enshrined and accepted in society, and you go to jail if you don't like it. Do you think that's where they're bringing it, and that's the purpose of all this?
Right. If you think about how we if you think about how we are made or designed or created, those are all synonyms, quite frankly, or synonymous. Okay, that's a theological statement, what I just made. Okay, how we are made, how we are designed, how we are created presupposes a designer, a creator. So you really have one of two perspectives. Either we evolved through happenstance, which would mean we're the only mutation that benefited from being a mutant. Mutation means you go from the norm or the standard, you deviate away from that, and it always degrades.
That's poetic when we're talking about the trans movement in society.
Okay. I've never once heard of a mutation that benefited the species. That's different than adaptation. You have adaptation because bodies are designed to adapt to things within species. But you don't go from cold-blooded to warm-blooded. How do you do that? Right? You don't go from gills to lungs without drowning partway through. So there's different systems that are different by nature. So if you violate some of the natural law that these systems are based upon, you don't somehow magically leap. And that's why evolution is it's a theological belief that somehow we dispense with what we know. We dispense with laws of thermodynamics. We dispense with all these things. And suddenly we go from less complex to increasingly complex. But if you talk to any doctor or anybody that's studied the body and the mind, that the human body is so amazingly complex, that it's so precise that anything that deviates away from the precision will, in a way, it's a cancerous state.
Right. And then that won't produce too. So it won't leave its mark on, yeah, right.
So the premise is that, and that's why when you go to med school, until the trans myth crap came along, they used to actually understand male and female, and there was female doctors for female issues. But as far as the human body, we have what is the ideal. So this is health. This is a healthy eye. So we look at, in the anatomy books, we start from what is good, what is right, the model, and then we look at disease states. So we can actually say when the body is working as designed, okay, so there's the model. Are we to assume then that this body was designed without a designer, without a creator? You look at genetics, and there's simply 4 letters, and depends upon how you arrange them.
Right.
Whether you'll have an inanimate or an animate object, and whether you have a tree or a human being. So there's actually a blueprint. There's actually a computer program, so to speak.
Right.
Well, how do you have that by accident? With the specificity that cells will divide at this certain point in time, and these cells will become this, but because we want, or those that are coming from, they want to dismiss the idea of God, they'll have to somehow tell us something that's not so, that intuitively we know this is silly. That, well, I know
The
it's
Big Bang.
right.
Right. Yeah.
Why? Because we have to get away from the natural conclusion, which is we accept these things. These things are given. These are self-evident that all men are created. So if there is a creator that is so specific with the laws of the universe, I mean, you look at the world, look at our earth. And on a macro and micro level, there's such specificity for life to exist on earth and for us to be able to exist that it ends up getting to a point where it's stupid to believe and therefore insulting to a creator to say that it just happened. It makes more sense to say, wow, this is pretty amazing to think that out of all the universe, this planet is designed in such a way to sustain my perfectly designed human being, person, and that we're more than just flesh and bones, but we're social creatures.
Right.
It's not good that man should be alone, and the two shall become one flesh. That's a psychological, that's a social, and that's a moral, and that's a spiritual part to us.
Right.
And Satan wants to divorce and separate and void all of that. Why? Because if he can get people to view themselves as gods in their own lives, as the arbiters of right and wrong, now he has separated them from any accountability and any sense that they need to abide by the moral laws, just that there are physical laws. And so now my life is lived unto me, to thine own self be true. Fancy way of saying, I'm going to do me. Well, like that's anything new. That's what happens at the sandbox when we tell our kid, no, Johnny, you have your own toys. This is yours. And now we separate out private property. We have a little private property lines. We draw a line in the sand. Don't cross that line. This is yours. Okay.
Right.
We have to do that because of the fall, because ego entered in, and now there's been a tectonic, an unfortunate tectonic shift ever since the Garden of Eden, which is how do you multiply, be fruitful and multiply while keeping ego in check and maintaining high value in relationships. If you want to unleash ego, you do it in two ways. You feed someone a lie, which is they are the center of their own universe and they are not accountable to anybody else. So they can live however they want. Other people don't matter as much as they do, because you can rip people off a whole lot of different ways rather than just physically. So I can say that I'm being true to myself while I'm bleeding you dry, but if you don't know it and you don't catch it, then you'll never catch on, and I'm doing me. Right. And the easiest way to bleed someone dry is to say there are no differences in gender or sex, and therefore I, as a guy, will sweet talk a woman into bed. I'm doing a social contract, even though I know women give sex to gain love and men give love to gain sex. And in the morning, I say we had good times and I walk away and she has a broken heart. Why? Because we're different by nature. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying we're different by nature. And so if men and women don't understand and value and appreciate the difference, women are always going to lose, and therefore children will always lose. And therefore you look at those cultures that remove any idea of a monotheistic God who cares about people and will give us what our actions and thoughts and attitudes deserve based upon how we treated one another. And you'll have a society that will have bacchanalian feasts and will throw children in the river and a one-child policy, and the strongest will and fittest will survive. That's the way the world works. And so the way to supercharge ego and to unleash it and untether it from any sense of moral accountability is to say that I am the master of my sexuality and my sexuality is here for me. You create somebody who is selfish about their own sexuality, my body, my choice, and I'm not saying, making a political statement. Since when has that been about Planned Parenthood? My body, my
Plant.
choice. And God comes along and says, guess what? Present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to him. He's basically saying that, no, your body is not your choice. The two areas that God went after for his people were food and sexuality. It's very interesting. You'll see where I'm at spiritually with God by how I view food, whether or not I'm a foodie or not, whether I eat to live or live to eat. You watch me go out to a restaurant and you'll see what kind of person I am. Either the server is my servant, I go, they don't matter, so I won't tip them. Or if they bring me the wrong food, you watch people how they act.
I worked in food service. I
Right, there
worked
you
in
go,
the kitchen.
right?
Yeah.
And everybody hates it when a bunch of Christians come in because it's like a bunch of track and no tip, right?
Yeah,
So,
no tip. Yeah.
So, okay, watch somebody when it comes to their food and when it comes to their sex, and you're going to see right where somebody's at in terms of moral development, character development.
Right.
And therefore, now you add on top of that the power of sexuality to energize. And now you will take whatever direction somebody was heading in terms of selfishness or selflessness, and now you will supercharge that. And that's why a totalitarian government will always, first of all, downplay the importance of family. So you have to disconnect that from any value system, the nuclear value, any allegiance and loyalty. So it's collectively, you put kids in a collective family. But then you place no moral value on sex and sexuality. Now you've created someone that, first of all, can be molded into the state's image, but they have no allegiance unto them except unto themselves.
Right.
Or unless you've really done a mind game, then they'll become kamikaze for the emperor when the emperor, doesn't care about them. And so then you've also created what amounts to a cult member, where a cult member's out there, they've taken a vow of poverty, all their money goes, they used to be out at Los Angeles International Airport in the 70s, the Hare Krishnas, they'd be dancing,
Right.
give them money, and they take all the money, and they always got the recruits, those that they targeted for cults, come out of Ivy League or UC Berkeley or Stanford. Why? They go after the intelligent people, very left brain, that have no intuition. And so you
just like the Satanists too, just
there,
like the Church of Satan,
right? And so they'll actually give the money that they earn as they've been spending at LAX outside of airport all day. They give it to. They're assuming everybody in the cult has taken vows of poverty, whether in the Catholic Church or anything. And what are they all doing? The leaders are living high on the hog, having orgies in beach homes, driving Rolls Royces for the Maharishi or whatever. Okay.
Right.
Yet the cult members will see this and they actually smile. So whether the royal family, whether dictatorships, we love our dictator.
Right. Stockholm syndrome.
There you go. So that's it. So leaders know that the way you will really cement a mindset of selfishness and of mindlessness, as far as we've got a brain, but we're not using it, is you play to someone's sex and sexuality and make it all about them. And now you have somebody that can be pure intellect, but devoid of 100% morals. And because they're human, something's going to also be developing within them, which is a malevolence for anything weaker. So now, instead of loving people using things, I use people and love things. But then when it comes to sex and sexuality, it's not an intellectual endeavor. That's why once a guy gets what he wants, it's not that he just loves her and leaves her. He will actually have a disdain toward her. He'll disrespect her.
Right.
And then actually go through those various stages of degrading. And that's not bad enough. Now we want to humiliate. That's not bad enough. Now we want to start harming. That's not bad enough. Because now we've harmonized with the dark realm. And now the dark realm is going to energize that person that thinks he's pure intellect. So people think that Kinsey was pure intellect. Meanwhile, he was a sexual, sadistic pedophile. Right. Who was getting off on harming kids and calling it science. And nobody wants to look at his own writing that, oh, look, a 2-year-old had 37 climaxes within 24 hours. So tell me who was doing it, what were they doing to the kid, and they were interpreting what is climax. Somebody's
Right.
working on a kid for 24 hours, so they're torturing a kid, taking his penis, and they are yanking his penis for 24 hours. And you're going to say, oh, that pain is actually writhing in pleasure. So who's going to write that way? That's a pedophile. So Kinsey was a pedophile. He was a sadistic pedophile. But that sadistic pedophile named Kinsey was a bug scientist and entomologist. So where did he come from? And who was he aligned with? Oh, Aleister Crowley, who called himself the Beast, and you got to be pretty bad if Mussolini is going to kick you out of the country. And that's why Kinsey, according to Judith Reisman, flew out to the Abbey, and that famous picture, Kenneth Anger is taking that picture there. Kinsey is in the Abbey. Why did Kinsey fly out to Aleister Crowley's Abbey? Because according to Judith Reisman, Kinsey wanted to collect the correspondence letters between he, Kinsey, and the Beast, the most wicked man on earth. And Judith Reisman makes the case that the CIA was funding Kinsey, and Kinsey was laundering money to Aleister Crowley. That's how Aleister Crowley could have his little abbey without getting a job.
Interesting.
And
yeah, he was always looking for money from government.
With a Nazi, and they were doing the experiments on kids in that context.
Right.
And then they used it to create a phrase that everybody now believes. We don't know. We've been scripted or brainwashed. Children are sexual from birth. Guess who created that phrase?
Right.
And so we buy it. And now we fill the field of psychology, who are supposed to be mandated reporters. And now we can't see what's happening in front of us because, children are sexual from birth. And we can't see that there's the red flags that they are being perped on. And now we say, well, it's really not what it looks like. And therefore, actually, what we're seeing when a young girl says, I don't want to be a girl, I wish I was a boy, we don't interpret that as she's being perped on. It's, she must be transgender. And so we're now going to send her on, put her onto the moving sidewalk where she will be medicalized, which is sterilization, and then ultimately dumped out onto a surgeon's gurney where we'll chop off her breasts. And then because she'd already been perped on, then once that male part that doesn't identify with the breasts goes away or gets tucked back in, the female part comes out. Now she's added insult to injury. Now she will become likely or definitely depressed, if not likely suicidal. So if you're a country that's pushed this, now the next best thing, both in terms of ensuring silence of the lambs, the kid takes the dirty little secrets, whoever's perped on the kid will take it to the grave, and you'll slough off the ends of the bell-shaped curve and the weeds and the non-producers of life. What do? You now make it so that physician-assisted suicide for those kids that are depressed, minors, so medical aid in dying that was passed in Canada. So now depressed kids that have their breasts removed are able to be medically assisted in committing suicide, and they take the secrets of who perped on them to the grave.
Wow. And the parents of that child are told if you don't let them transition, they're going to commit suicide.
There you go. And now somebody can snatch your child, go across state lines like they can in Maine. They can in California, I guess Minnesota.
Oh yeah, the Minnesota is the sanctuary state for.
There you go. And
he's going to be the vice president.
Vice president
after they select her, just like they selected Biden the last time.
Right.
I mean, voting doesn't help.
Where did those 85,000 undocumented kids go? They've been trafficked.
Right.
So Kamala and the selection of the VP, if I'm a child trafficker, they are my greatest gift.
God. Okay, so that's why.
Okay, now so meaning, so we're looking at a culture and those that are shifting the culture. If you really want to so if you're the Schwabs, if you're the New World Order folks, if you're the World Economic Forum,
right,
people are just pawns, all of this. So
yeah.
how do you ensure that the pawns will never awaken to find out they're pawns? Well, you give them bread and circuses. Okay, what does that mean? You keep them fat, dumb, and happy kind of thing. Well, keep them myopic. So now we say sex and video games. Okay, so in sports, but sprinkled through all of that is going to be, you're going to saturate with sex and sexuality. Why? Because now sex is going to be inverted. It's all about self, and you can fast track things dark.
Right.
So that's the best way to speed up the process of a culture moving into socialism and therefore communism, a top-down dictatorship.
Right.
So it's to your benefit that you loosen the morals of a country, because now you're going to guarantee an increase in selfishness and objectification of people. And that's what this is all about. And therefore, as people become objectified, there's an increase in callousness and indifference. And so you take a culture that's been highly sexualized, and they don't care about somebody else's pain.
Right.
And so I don't care what happens to somebody else. Well, therefore, I'm not going to care about kids being trafficked. I'm not going to care about Pornhub that's traffic hub. I'm just not going to care. Therefore, I'm not going to care about abortion. I'm not going to care about those policies and policies and laws that are being passed that allow for the shifting of perspective of it starts with the policies, the destigmatization of pedophilia. Why? Because there are no morals. To thine own self be true. And so we'll still reframe it to get rid of the old hangups. So it's not going to be pedophiles, it's going to be minor attracted, and then it's just mature minors. And before you know it, love is love. Love knows no age, no boundaries, no stage, no anything. We're two people in love, and I'm a young spirit and a two-spirit, and she's a mature minor. So we can then allow her to make independent medical decisions, and she controls her body. It's her body, her choice. And I, as a perpetrator, have played you, the public, and now I can do anything, including child trafficking, because you think child trafficking is the snatch and grab.
Right. Meanwhile, our government is facilitating this child trafficking of all the undocumented children, and then they're being put in these homes with 10 adult males that are all different families, and and all of this, and then months later they can't find the kid. Where'd the kid go? Oh, who knows?
Yeah. So as the culture shifts, so now getting to the chart,
right,
John, if you want to,
I'll share that here 1 second.
In the part where we have the arrows, because now the question is this: once a society moves selfish into the selfish realm, you layer that with sex and sexuality. Now you're going to supercharge selfishness, and you're going to supercharge the normal process of objectification. And male sexuality will always it'll always push boundaries, because it's not just becoming selfish, but it's now what used to excite doesn't excite anymore. And the drive will be more and more not in terms of lust or what we think in terms of attraction. Now it's about having a negative effect. That's psychopathy.
Right.
Not just about getting what you want. That's sociopathy. Now I'm not satisfied in just having sex with a woman. I now have to add degradation. Think of 50 Shades.
Right. SRA. It eventually.
Okay. Now we're heading toward it, right? So the further I get into detachment, people aren't people. Now these are just objects. Now I'm a Nazi by degree.
Right.
Now you overlay that with darkening, progressively darkening. I mean, moral darkening. The lights have gone out morally. Now it's human nature. Human nature is not static. It eventually, whether people like it or not, there is a spiritual realm, and all Satan needs to succeed is just a lot of different opportunities. But the one he loves most is when somebody has said there is no spiritual realm.
Right.
Okay, who are you convincing, him or you?
The ultimate occulting of,
There it is.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the Antichrist is not going to dress in a devil suit.
Right. Yeah, bathed in light,
politician.
Lucifer, right? Yeah.
He's what's he going to look like? Really normal. That's why people are going to be enamored with him.
Right.
He's going to be really smooth.
The best of us, a God man, somebody, we
guy
can be God.
Fully self-actualized.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But he just happens to be really energized. Really? Okay.
By these
So
demonic forces which are propelling him into.
there we go. And
Yeah.
those demonic forces have a goal, have an intended design, and ultimately, because Satan hates God, he knows he can't get God. So what do? It's like you can't get at the Godfather. What do? You go for that which the Godfather cares about. You always go after the kids.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's what Satan is doing. That's why Satan goes after people. Satan doesn't care about people, but he knows that God cares about people. So the way to hurt God is you hurt what God cares about, which are ultimately the least of these. So he's going to superincharge with a dark degree of energized, ultimately, malevolence. He's going to use male sexuality ultimately to degrade and harm, while that person also, so the most ideal satanic individual really is a Nazi scientist.
Right.
Where and think about the film Schindler's List. There's a scene where he's just screwed a Jewish female. Okay, he had sex with her all night. He's used her, and now she's going back to the barracks. If anybody remembers that scene, he's kind of talking to somebody. He's carrying on this conversation now with somebody in the room. He's just had sex with her all night. Before you know it, we see him putting a scope to his eye. He's got a gun. He's got a rifle. He's got a sniper rifle. And the girl he just used for sex all night, he's had go back to the barracks, and before you know it, he trains his crosshairs on her skull and he shoots her. What is that? It's just the natural outworking of a satanic mentality.
It's perfect domination. Totally.
And that is simply another form of SRA. Well, I would say that is a combination of MK Ultra and SRA, which is a person, primarily males, who are really bright and have harmonized with utter darkness, and therefore, like Himmler in Himmler's castle, Wieselberg. What happened at Wieselberg? You have the melding of pure intellect with pure dark spirituality, and then fast forward, in some cases less than a year prior to Nuremberg trial, you take some of those exact same individuals and now you put them in key positions in the US. We call that Operation Paperclip. Yeah. And we don't think that those people are still who they are, yet now empowered with government power and money. And what
the winning team, the winning team of this.
As a therapist, I wanted to know why it's in Cal State Fullerton in my program had I never heard of any of that. So therefore, I have no clue that really bright, evil people that were Nazis, and it just doesn't take Germany to create a Nazi. You take the Nazi uniform off, and what do you got? You got people. We want to believe the Nazis died off with the Nazis. No, they just took their uniform off. Okay, and so we want to believe that people would never experiment on other people. Look at COVID. We want to believe that there is no satanic realm. That's it doesn't matter what you believe or not. We want to believe that sex is just sex, really? Then why the degradation on top of it? Why the humiliation? Why now do we have even that Sam Smith deviant guy and this video about a bunch of homosexuals having sex in their golden showers? What does that have to do with sex at all? That humiliation, that degradation, making each other eat fecal matter. What does that have to do with it?
That's SRA. That's
okay. We're now getting there.
Right. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
Right now, eventually, we then have a fascination. It's a combination of the Bacchanalian thing where we're now going to castrate, and eventually now we like to get into blood. And now you watch some of this spirit cooking stuff.
Yeah.
And, oh, by the way, could it be that some of the people that we're going to actually do that to are still alive? Well, who would do that? A Nazi? Well, there aren't any more Nazis. Oh, maybe there are.
Right.
Well, John, you've never worked with anybody. Here you claim to have worked in the prison system. You never worked with anybody that was arrested for SRA, correct? And you never will. Right? Now, in Utah, they've actually called it a crime, but what are you going to find in terms of the charges? That's where you're going to go. If you scroll up on the sheet, on the chart that I gave you, you're going to find these charges. You're not going to find SRA. You're going to find rape. You're going to find that objects were used, but I'm sorry, the olive green level all the way up there. Okay, those various charges are what you're going to see on the rap sheet.
Right.
And therefore, they're standalone charges. But what you don't know until you get into the police reports is, oh, this had to do with a group of guys. Oh, and they were doing what? Oh, the child. Where was the child? Hanging upside down. What were they doing with the child? They were slicing on the child. They were taking a cross and shoving it in her body. They were orally and anally and vaginally raping her. Oh, why don't I see that? Because you're not going to see SRA descriptions in criminal law. You're going to look at the behaviors they did. But if you don't have the context, so for people that haven't worked in a prison on psych staff, why is that important? I have access to all criminal charges. I can go anywhere in any files.
Right.
And so when you start to see, oh, you mean all those came from one night?
Right.
Oh,
how many nights are there in a year?
Doing? Oh, crosses and blood and oh, you mean they actually found bodies?
Right.
Well, charged with murder. Well, how about dismemberment of a corpse? What do you think that's about? Well, now if you want to scroll down, here's what people think: dismemberment of a corpse. Well, we must have a Jeffrey Dahmer. So if you go to the one back with the arrow, sorry about that.
Sure.
Here's how, right? You look at the top. Well, the differentiation is the degree of self-control.
Right.
Those that have little self-control, and this is where the PCL-R comes in, the Hero Psychopathy Checklist, it focuses on the top of that line. Well, those are not the ones I'm worried about. Well, we should be worried about all those. So those are the Dahmers, those are the Hillstride Stranglers, those are the Bundys. But as a matter of fact, that's the top little branch of arrows. As you head up, we come to the first division right there, or the first, right? There you go. So now we're going up the impulsive one. These are not a lot of planning. When we get to that first division point right there, if we keep going up versus go over to parallel, kind of the right, the difference is people that are acting by themselves or with a group.
Right. So ritual, secret society type thing.
Okay, actually, that's going to be below. So everybody above the line is going to be pretty impulsive, meaning they're opportunists.
Right.
Not a lot of sophisticated planning. You don't put those dates on a calendar.
Right, but they work in a group too, but they plan together.
That's right. That's where the football team raped the girl.
Mm-hmm. But they all got the story together and won't
there you go.
Protect each other.
So it takes some coordination for the basketball team, the group of guys that are going to rape a group of girls or whatever.
Right.
The frat house. So it takes some coordination and some positive or negative peer pressure or something. You got to incentivize the guys to you're either permitting them or forcing them to go along with it. Then the question is, how are you going to keep people from talking? So that's above
blackmail.
That,
blackmail, right?
Okay,
right.
But the thing that we're talking about, Sean, and all the MK Ultra and the genuine SRA. Now the question is, when it comes to SRA, is it the overt stuff with the pentagrams and stuff like the Hillside Strangler with Ramirez? No, that's above the line.
Right.
Those people are not very smart. Now they have high intellect. Ted Bundy did, but once the police come across, there's going to be a crime scene.
Right.
And so somebody's going to get busted. So the amount of victims that people can have, that the perps have above that center line, that degree of intensity. So the degree of intensity is the same, but those are going to leave criminal indicators, blood stains, right? There's gonna be
because they're working from passion instead of calculation.
There you go. Those are the guys that are going to prison. Everybody above that degree of intensity line, that prison is filled with it. Everybody below are in positions of power and they're methodical and there's not a trace.
Right.
And that has longevity, and they recruit because they're getting off in a very different way. And they're going to make sure there are no victims. Why? They don't want to go to prison. Why? Because they're working their way up the corporate or political ladder. Why? Because then they have access to even more things, and they're going to facilitate the good old boy network such as Skull and Bones.
Right.
That's below the line. And that's SRA. When we're typically talking SRA, you've got the impulsive SRA, bloody stuff, and somebody's going to get busted, or the sophisticated SRA where there's still bloody stuff, but there's a cleanup. The bodies are disposed of where there's no evidence, and even the best of forensic detectives are going to come in and they're not going to find anything. You got to be pretty good. That's a lot of planning. And or now you're going to add the Nazi scientific element to it. Now it's MK Ultra.
Right.
So these are people without a conscience. Now they've become harmonized and energized by darkness, and they become one with that darkness, and that's what propels them. Now the question is, to what extent do they have self-control? The PCL-R will say that a key feature of a psychopath is impulsivity in criminal history. Jeffrey Epstein was not above the line, he was below that line.
Right. Right. And Jeffrey Epstein was integrated completely with our science structures, with our education systems. Like, he had an office at Harvard. He would he was working with Bill Gates. He had a genetic farm where he was impregnating women with his seed. And he's just one guy.
That's right. That's right.
And all the blackmail. Whoa. I mean, so this, I'm very glad we got to that before our time was up, because really, that's the big picture.
Yeah.
The occultism is hiding the worst deviancy, Dahmer level stuff. And this is how, like, when a lot of people are like, oh, that SRA stuff, that can't be real. I don't.
Because they either don't want to know, or they don't understand,
Right.
or they're downplaying it because they're into deviant stuff, or they're a part of this.
Right. Or they've like grown up in the society where that's normal and okay, right?
Yeah.
So it's very wonderful for you to highlight this today and to show us this. It's really fully. It's not just the trans movement. It's not just the pedophilia. I mean, pedophilia is one component of the SRA, necessary for the mind control. They get off on it, sure, but it's also necessary for the occulting. They go so hard in hiding it, they even make the victims not remember. They're so calculated in their cover-up and clean-up abilities that they're even cleaning up the brain of their victim. They're not just throwing it away and being like, whatever, who cares what she says or whatever. They're making it so she can't remember, so that it is like impossible.
That's right. And so also they have designs to use that victim.
Right.
And the goal for a perpetrator is the perpetrator wants to accomplish the perpetration, but they also want to make sure they never get busted and go to prison.
Right.
The more sophisticated you are, you'll never have to overtly use force or coercion, because you've created that on the inside where the victim will govern themselves by that internal mechanism. Once they become shattered on the inside or compartmentalized, one part of them will be the voice, as it were, of the perpetrator.
Right, the abusers.
And so they will then, the victim growing up, will keep themselves in check.
Right.
Until the survivor can go through the process to begin to realize what has happened, and that persecutorial alter, as it were, that part of them realizes that, in a way, they just have had the Stockholm syndrome.
Yes.
So it's been helping them work through the trauma of it, and eventually their anger can come back, and their anger will match the degree of impact or hurt that will empower them, that will bring back their intuition to place responsibility or knapsacks back where it belongs. And that's the process of therapy, by the way, for the survivor.
Wow. So you provide that therapy. You have a website, SurvivorSupport.net, where there's lots of information and tools for survivors to help find their way out of this affliction that's been put upon them by their abusers. This understanding of the psychopath is important so that the victims can frame properly what that abuse is and not be in love with the abuser, so they can actually separate the love feeling, that Stockholm syndrome, and actually see it for what it is. It's very important. I'm glad you're you. So would you like to speak about SurvivorSupport.net before? And we have some other websites, Church Protect and your YouTube.
Yeah, SurvivorSupport.net is a resource for survivors. As a matter of fact, if there is a survivor that has been listening to this, if you want to listen or gain access to the series, it will be expanding even more. I think there's 7 parts on that, plus also about the psychopath. The third tab over on the top there, you're going to see Journey to Healing, then Help for the Journey. So third tab over, 4th tab down.
The impact of trauma.
There you go. You go to that one. And so if you want to find out, does any of this resonate? Were you possibly the victim of this? If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the very first video of that. That's a poem by a male survivor. But you scroll down far enough, just a little bit more, and you'll see the very first video right there. And that's a chart, by the way, of a survivor that has been through horrific stuff. You can download that. That's the various internal parts and layers. So if you're the victim of SRA, MK Ultra, serious abuse, that's your inside world. So you'll have to get to know your inside world. If you keep scrolling down, so there's multiple parts, part one to that series. If you want to learn about psychopaths, if you scroll far enough down, you'll see that series as well. And there's that downloadable chart, Sean, that we have covered today. So if you go far enough down, you'll see that series on the making of a psychopath. So it starts right there. So at the bottom or underneath each chart, you can download those charts.
Wonderful.
The Survivor Support. There's also a podcast that deals with counseling topics. You can access that on SurvivorSupport.net. Then there's churchprotect.org. That's more dealing with my own research that coming from my 11 plus years on psych staff with the Department of Corrections, Pennsylvania. And then since then, and I currently am a sex offender treatment provider, and I also work with survivors. So churchprotect.org, there's my blog. I haven't been able to add to it in a while, but good stuff. It's survivorsupport.us. So that is my blog. Then there is a website dealing with the trans movement, so that people have information available to them. That is unmaskingthetransmovement.com. So I've got this .net, .org, and so survivorsupport.net, churchprotect.org, and unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Same title on YouTube. That actually may have more up to date, because this is a labor of love. None of us get paid for any of this. So.
Right.
On YouTube, those are all the videos under Unmasking the Trans Movement. We're doing a live stream Sunday nights, so people can ask questions from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's kind of what we've shifted to with that. And that can be accessed through Unmasking the Trans Movement on YouTube. And
wonderful. Oh, so not just Jon Uhler, we need Unmasking the Trans Movement.
So that's, if you want to see what I've worked on most recently, go there and you'll see in order. But actually just Unmasking the Trans Movement, then you'll actually see that channel. And that's how you get to the live stream. So there is that one right there.
Right.
So there you go. Under live. So you can see what we've been doing live now. So come Sunday evening, we're going to do part 5 of the red flag indicators of sexual abuse that are being reframed. under the guise of gender issues when it really is sexual abuse. So we're looking at that. Part 5.
That's very important. So the trans movement has, in its very nature, what it is and what it does, it is covering up the indicators of predatory child sexual abuse.
Correct.
And this is your 5th
Part 5.
exposing of that topic. This is
Yeah.
like, I've watched a couple of those, and as they're live, it's very interesting, and you go so far in depth. Your co-host is a little loud on his microphone sometimes.
Brad
God bless him,
Wilder, he's
though.
a hockey coach, and he's a wonderful guy. He's a dad, and he cares. And
I can
it's a
tell he
labor of love.
cares.
None of us
Yes.
ever get paid for this. We just do it because we feel compelled, because people need to know the information.
Likewise here as well. I mean,
That's right, Sean, yours as well, right? We just do what we feel we can.
Right. And this, I mean, I have a voice, and I have created a channel, and you know, I'm very happy to help support the information that you are bringing to the ears and eyes of everyone here, and all of our listeners and all of society. We're doing our part. Every little bit counts, and if you're putting it online, others can find it, others can discover, and it de-occults the sinister that society has become. And if we want to learn our way out of slavery, we need to understand what has been done to us in our heads and our worldview, and who are the real victims. How do we protect those people? How do we fortify our moral character and prevent against our own satanification? You know, we need to recognize when Hollywood is doing this to our brains and say, no, I'm not going down that road. You know, I'm not going to watch Human Centipede, or I'm not going to watch 50 Shades of Grey. You know, like, if we can maintain a purity of our heads, and that will maintain a purity of our intent and our heart. And if everybody gets on the same page of that, we can have that high trust society where we could shake hands and have, you know, where we don't have to worry about a deviant predator coming into my child's swim room where they're changing and, you know, accosting her eyes and getting pleasure from it, you know, or whatever else they do. They masturbate, and like, they do all these things as an attack on women. Like, if we can preserve and protect the integrity of our women and our children and their heads, then naturally society will follow, and we can help to climb out of this hell pit that we find ourselves in. And all we got to do is just look at the laws, look at who they are promoting for the next generation of the United States' executive office. I mean, we've already been through 4 years of, you know, the Rachel Levine, and the other one that steals the underwear, and you know, right. So we've already seen that, and that's normal now. So what's next? Like, what's next? I'm scared. So, but this, understanding all of this, we can help predict what's next. And when we see it, we can protect our sanity and protect our children's minds and explain it to them. This is why it's happening like this. Oh, yeah, that is weird. And I'll talk to you about it, instead of being like, well, that's just how it is, whatever. And then the kid is like left to try to put the pieces together. Then the Satanists have their way. If we are there to help, to guide, and to show the deviancy, and like, this is obviously wrong, this is why, then the kid can formulate the proper nuts and bolts. And not just kids, all of us, like the grown-ups, can piece together the reality of our worldview, like put together, make our worldview congruent with the world that's actually happening. You know, if we can align to truth, then we will be able to put our feet down on solid ground and have a place to fight from. We can actually have a solid ground. And when we swing our sword and we hold up our shield, it has an effect in the world. Because if we're using truth as our basis and our foundation, they can't shake it. I mean, no matter how many lies they say, that that is the power of God behind. Like they just like the demons, they run at the when they hear the voice of Jesus, they hate that, right? Because he's the authority, right? He represents the actual natural law of the universe, and that is what they're fighting. That's what they're scared of. That's why they're inverting our everything. This has been such an important conversation. I love to hear the most important principles that I live by come from you, and the way that you describe it in a different way. Uh, it aligns perfectly with what I understand and what I've learned. And the nature of Satanism is the same as the nature of psychopathy. And I'm so glad that you're able to highlight that for our listeners and viewers today. Um, is there anything else you'd like to say? I guess we're like 8 minutes late. I know we had to end at 1.
John, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. We can do it again. We'll arrange for another time. Yeah, we can go into the trans movement, help people understand the dangers of that.
Wonderful. I would love that. And thank you again for joining us. And we look forward to the next one. And thank you, listeners, for listening. And we will see you next time on Wake the Dead.